Most people start their day like clockwork. Get up, get dressed, and jump into their cars, buses, or bikes, headed somewhere without giving it much thought. Every year, however, about 1.5 million people don't make it home after heading out on the road. A lot of those deaths happen during our late-night drives on the way back from a night out or heading to a club. And while most people would blame things like drunk driving or tired eyes, the real danger isn't always what they think. It's the things lurking out there in the darkness of the open road, hiding just beyond the headlights. My name is Ethan Williams, and on the night of February 13th, 2021, I got into my car, pulled out of the driveway, and started heading to a friend's party at around 9 p.m. The party was something a few of my friends put together every year for those of us who weren't in relationships and were looking to have fun, get drunk, and maybe meet someone the night before Valentine's Day. I, however, had just gotten out of a 4-year relationship, so I wasn't very eager to go partying. But after hours of my friends convincing me, there I was, driving into town and trying to convince myself to loosen up and have fun. I turned on the radio to get myself in the right mood, but the only thing on was a slow 90s song I had never heard before. It didn't matter much to me, though, as I wasn't a big night driver, so my focus was more on the road than the music selection. The house was located in a pretty secluded and quiet area, and about 5 minutes away from it, I noticed the road that led up to the house was so dark and narrow that even with my headlights on, it was almost impossible to see anything that wasn't directly in front of the car. The wind was blowing the huge trees around, and it was obvious the road was barely used, even during the day. But despite the difficulty in seeing, I eventually made my way to the house. After spending a couple of hours with my friends, attempting to have fun, I decided to call it a night, and by 3 a.m. on Valentine's Day, I'd said goodbye to my friends and started the drive back home. My mood was quite different during the return drive, and after a couple of minutes sitting in silence, I noticed it had gotten much darker outside, and I could barely see anything that wasn't in reach of my headlights. Soon enough, about 7 minutes into the drive, I got to an area that seemed even darker than the other places, which I naturally assumed was the road I'd used earlier that night on my way to the house. I slowed down, and after once again carefully driving through the darkness, I made it out onto the city roads, where I thought everything would be perfectly fine until I made it home. The ride home that night was nothing out of the ordinary. All I had on my mind was getting into bed after a hot shower, and all I could see ahead of me was empty road. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I spotted something in the distance, and I immediately got that sinking feeling like when you just know something's off. At first, I could barely make out what it was, so I drove a bit closer. What the fuck? I muttered as the strange scene in front of me finally came into view. A black car seemed to be broken down on the side of the road, and 2 safety cones had been set up beside the car in an attempt to stop cars from passing. In the few seconds I stopped to make out the scene, I heard footsteps coming from the distance as a man slowly revealed himself from the darkness ahead. Although I couldn't see anything but a pair of jeans walking towards my car, I knew everything about that situation was wrong and I needed to get out of there fast. The man continued to approach my car, and I decided the best thing to do would be to drive through the cones and leave. But as soon as I put my foot on the gas, the man quickly got in the way of the car, forcing me to stop. At this point, he was now close enough for me to see his face, and my stomach dropped in horror as I saw the massive scar that ran along his entire face, leaving him with only one working eye. The man wasn't huge in any way and was probably around 150 pounds, standing at 5'6". He walked up to the side of the car and pressed his face against the window while knocking slowly with a sinister smile on his face. He didn't have on a mask or gloves, so his intention seemed pretty clear to me, and at the moment I was completely frozen with fear. All I could do was pray someone else came along. The horrific man continued to knock and breathe on my window. After taking a moment to calm down, I realized that since he was now standing by the side of the car, there was no one else blocking the road, and that might have been my only chance to escape. I took a deep breath and turned to the man before saying, "What do you want, man? I don't have any money, so please just leave." The man backed up from the window a little bit, and I could see excitement in his eyes as he replied, "What do I want? Well, I just want a ride, that's all." Most of his teeth were missing, and I remember shaking with fear as I maintained eye contact with him. I knew I had to find a way to change gears without him noticing, so I began to slowly reach for the gear while asking him some more questions to distract him. "Please, man, I just want to get home to my wife and kids. Why are you doing this?" I said in an attempt to make him feel sorry for me. Instead, all I got was a glimmer in his eyes as he noticed my hand grab the gear to change it. He immediately let out a screech and slammed a machete through my window. Startled, I ignored the glass shards and slammed on the gas, taking off through the cones and down the street. I didn't have any time to relax. However, I turned to my right to the insane image of the man latched onto my car door. He let out a menacing laugh before grabbing onto my arm, causing the car to swerve violently. The struggle continued for a while, but eventually, after latching onto my arm one final time, the man began to pull himself in through the window while grunting heavily. Before I could react, I felt his teeth sink deep into my neck. As I shrugged him off, he let out a laugh, and there seemed to be a joy he got from seeing his mouth covered with my blood. Terrified of what he'd do next, I punched him a few times, and immediately I noticed an effect on him. I slammed the brakes, flinging him off my door and onto the road ahead of me. My hands were shaking, and I was losing a lot of blood. Every part of me wanted to run him over, but as I watched him struggling on the floor, I couldn't bring myself to move. About a minute later, he got up slowly before eventually limping off into the darkness by the side of the road. I arrived at the hospital 20 minutes after the incident that night. The doctors had a lot of questions for me, and the police was contacted shortly after I arrived. Once I received treatment, I gave my statement to the police, and although they were informed about the scheme robbers used to get victims to stop late at night, they seemed very concerned by the man I described and the extent to which he was willing to go. A search party was put out for him that night, but despite all of their effort, he wasn't found that night or the next morning. That being said, his description was all over the news for the following weeks. Although he was never found, it became common knowledge to everyone in Boulder, Colorado, to never stop for stranded drivers when taking a late-night drive in the city. This story is loosely based on the highway robbery scheme that occurred in 2016 in Memphis, Tennessee. This happened during a period that saw a string of numerous staged accident scams, leading to countless robbers and murders of people who'd stopped to help fake stranded motorists and end up getting robbed, raped, and in some cases, killed by the very people they were trying to help.
That night, we had been driving for hours on the deserted roads of England. It was just Sophie, me, and the road in front of us. The original plan was to get to a small town for a weekend getaway, a little vacation we could fit in between our jobs. The road was still straight, and after a while, I decided we needed to stop for a while. Seeing an old gas station on the side of the road, I didn't hesitate. It was a good time to stop and get our energy back. The place looked like something out of another era, with a neon light flickering dimly over the entrance. Very 90s horror movie. Sophie offered to go downstairs to buy coffee. I nodded. I needed something to keep me awake. Several minutes passed while I waited in the car. I began to wonder what was taking so long. I could hardly believe there would be people at the gas station. I looked into the store and saw Sophie standing at the entrance. She was completely motionless, staring at something I couldn't see from where I was standing. I quickly got out of the car and approached her. As I got there, I saw what had had her paralyzed. A few feet away from her, a black dog as big as a damn wolf was standing in front of her. It didn't make any noise, nor did it move, it just stared at her. The animal had no collar, nor did it show any signs of being domestic. It was gigantic and terrifying. The man in the store looked at us in awe, but he didn't come to help us. Instead, he made a surprised face and walked through a door, seeming to be running away from the dog. Was he hiding? I shouted and waved my arms, trying to chase him away, but the dog didn't react. It didn't see me, only Sophie. She took a step back, and the dog took a step in her direction. It didn't make a sound, but the tension was enormous. Sophie began to tremble, her eyes filled with fear. I knew we had to get out of there as soon as possible. Without taking her eyes off the dog, Sophie rounded the dog and ran to the car. I quickly followed her as the dog walked slowly towards us. When Sophie got into the car, I ran to the driver's seat, intending to get us away from there as fast as possible. Just before I could get in, I felt a brutal blow to my side that threw me to the ground. The air rushed out of my lungs and my head hit the pavement hard. I looked up, stunned, and saw how the huge dog had rammed the car with such force that it shook the entire vehicle. Sophie screamed from inside. Despite the pain, I forced myself to get up and managed to open the car door. As soon as I was inside, I stepped on the accelerator. The wheels skidded on the asphalt, the car started up, and we drove away from the station. But we still hadn't gotten rid of the dog. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the creature running after us. My heart was beating a mile a minute as it sped up faster and faster. The dog was not far behind. It seemed to be getting closer and closer. What the hell? How could he keep up? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. I sped up more, going over 100 miles an hour, but the dog was still there. It was impossible that an animal could run so fast, I thought, but there he was, defying all logic. Worst of all, he didn't seem to be getting tired. He was running naturally, as if he could keep up the pace for much, much longer. But suddenly the dog turned sharply to one side, disappearing from our sight around a sharp bend. For a brief moment, we felt a huge relief. We had escaped. The relief was short-lived. As we rounded the next bend, we saw him again. He was in front of us in the middle of the road. This time he was not moving. He was standing upright, staring at us. I stomped hard on the brake, and the car skidded to a stop a few feet from the creature. Sophie gasped, her wild eyes fixed on the figure blocking our path. The dog, with a slow, deliberate movement, rose on its hind legs, adopting an almost human posture. At that moment, we both reacted at the same time and had the same thought. That was no dog. Sophie began to cry, her body shaking with fear. I wanted to say something to her, anything to calm her down, but I couldn't find the words. I didn't know what to say. It was like we were in a horror movie. The creature got back on all fours and, without warning, charged at the car with full force. The impact shook the entire vehicle in such a way that the windows vibrated. I felt the car shake under the pressure of the ramming, and for a moment, I thought we were going to roll over. Do something! I tried to make a quick decision, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed with fear. I was paralyzed. Noticing this, Sophie pushed me, took my place, pressed the accelerator, and turned the steering wheel towards the dog, trying to run it over. The car lunged forward, but the animal jumped to the side, avoiding the blow with ease. We drove past it, and as I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw its figure fade into the darkness. Is it gone? I don't know. I think so. I don't see him anymore. We were both looking back, looking for the dog. Neither of us thought that the real danger was coming from the front. The collision was brutal. I barely saw the other car come out of nowhere, invading our lane at full speed. It all happened in an instant, but that instant seemed to stretch into an eternity. The car spun twice. My vision blurred, and I felt a loud ringing in my ears. For a moment, I didn't know where I was or what had happened. When I regained consciousness, I tried to move, but pain shot through my body. I looked beside me, looking for Sophie, but her seat was empty. Despair flooded me as I realized what that meant. She didn't have her seatbelt on. With effort, I unfastened my seatbelt and crawled through the door. I managed to get out of the car, and when I looked up, I saw Sophie's body on the road, lifeless, surrounded by broken glass. All I could do was cry as I tried to get closer to her. Then I saw it. The dog. It was there, standing a few feet away from Sophie, watching her. The dog was slowly starting to approach Sophie's body. I made every effort to get to her first, but both legs were broken. I crawled hard, but it was useless. I was exhausted, beaten, and on the verge of collapse, but I couldn't let that creature take my wife. No! Get away from her! The dog stopped, turning its head toward me for a moment. But it didn't stop for long. He continued walking toward Sophie. When he reached her, he bent down and grabbed Sophie's body by the neck, dragging her into the darkness. I screamed, I cried, I cursed, but none of it changed. I stood there helpless, watching my wife disappear. I woke up in a hospital days later, surrounded by machines and doctors. Sophie was dead and I was alive, but barely. The doctors and police informed me that the drunk driver's car had drifted into our lane, causing the accident. My wife had been thrown from the vehicle by the force of the impact and had died on the spot. The driver had also died. But they said nothing about the dog. When I mentioned what I had seen and what had happened before and after the accident, the officers ignored me, thinking I was saying illogical things due to the shock of what I had experienced. They told me that there was no trace of any dog at the scene and that it was impossible for anything like that to have happened. Months later, when I was finally able to walk again, I came across the legend of the Barghest by chance in a conversation with an old man in a pub. He told me of this dog, the Barghest, as a harbinger of death, a spirit that appeared to announce the imminent end of those who were destined to die. The description fits perfectly with the creature I saw that night, and that was why the guy from the store hid. He knew the legend. That dog didn't do anything to Sophie, although he didn't try to help her either. He was just a message. Someone who knew my wife was about to die, and he was only around because of that. Because he was attracted to the smell of death that she had. I'm still trying to come to terms with what happened. If she knew about that legend, could she change her destiny? If we turned around, would she have been saved? I guess whatever happened, fate was written for Sophie, and I feel it was written for me, too. I can't live without her, and I haven't decided if I will.
Many times, the internet glorifies things that are not meant for a lot of people. Living off the grid in a van or an RV like a digital nomad has been trending lately, especially after COVID. But in reality, it may not be for everyone. In late 2020, I stopped renting my apartment, purchased a van with my savings, renovated it, and started traveling throughout the States. I had seen a few people on YouTube do it, and there were accounts on social media guiding first-time van lifters with tips. I was never close to my family, so it was easy for me to get up and travel solo. It was like taking a long road trip that had no end. I was not planning to record and put my experiences on YouTube, as I am a private person. At first, I decided to just stick to roaming my own state, and then started venturing throughout the country. It was learning the do's and don'ts of van life. At times, it used to be difficult to live in such a compact space, but as time passed, I got used to managing my life in the small tin box, as many people say. However, in my first few months of traveling, I had only had a few bad experiences, nothing to tell home about. But when I was about to complete my first year of van life, I was in Pennsylvania. By then, I had adopted a tabby cat, as it was nice to have company while I traveled. Pennsylvania was a nice state. I had traveled throughout the state and seen beautiful places. I planned to go from there to New York. I usually avoided driving at night, but as the journey was just a few hours long, I decided to go to drive at night. I had my GPS on as usual, and I was driving on the freeway. Suddenly, my GPS picked up a new shortcut that had less traffic and started guiding me to take that path instead of the freeway. I had always followed the GPS, and it had taken me to my destination safe and sound. So, I decided to take the shortcut. A few minutes into the road, I realized I was driving on some dark country road. Unlike the freeway, there were no cars or streetlights here. There was just long stretches of farms and trees. Occasionally, I would see a house or so. Till then, I had spent enough of my time in my van alone to not be alarmed or scared by the situation. I stuck to the road and did not stop or slow down my pace. Almost halfway into the road, I started getting a gut feeling that maybe I was lost. I kept on checking the GPS, and it was showing that I was on the right path. However, my guts said otherwise. There was no gas station around me to stop and ask the way. But when I looked out of the window, I could see lights in the distance, meaning I was closer to New York City than I thought. Suddenly, I heard a loud cracking noise, as if my tires had crushed a twig or perhaps a bone. And as I drove further ahead, the crunching sound continued. Rather, it intensified, and I was afraid that it would puncture my tires and leave me stranded alone in the middle of nowhere. So I finally gathered the guts and decided to get down to see what was lying on the road. When I stepped out, I also stepped on something that crushed beneath my feet. The road ahead of me was just lit by my van's headlights and nothing else. I switched on the flashlight on my cell and started looking at the road. To my utter horror and disgust, There were pentagrams drawn on the entire road, and on each part of the pentagram were duck heads. So every time one head got crushed, I heard the crunching sound. Also, the contents from the duck's head were on my shoes. I was so disgusted that I jumped back into my van and started driving at max speed. I know it was unsafe, but I wanted to get out of that place as fast as I could. It was around 10 p.m., and I knew something was wrong with this place. My GPS was showing only 5 miles to New York City, and at the next intersection, I would meet the few ways again. I did not mind the crunching of the ducks' heads, not the awful feeling I had in the pit of my stomach. I suddenly felt very heavy, and my head began to hurt. I had a feeling that someone was practicing dark magic on the road, and I was getting affected by it. Still, I kept on driving. That's when I saw the sign that said the intersection was 500 meters. I felt a relief, knowing that I was so close. So I slowed my van a bit, and just then, I heard 2 loud thumps on my van's passenger window. I increased my speed again and started driving like a crazy woman. I screamed, and this alerted my sleeping cat. She walked over from my bed in the back and sat on the passenger seat, staring out of the closed window and hissing. She never did that before, and it was as if she was sensing whatever had just banged on the window. As soon as I reached the freeway, I drove for a mile or so and then stopped at a spot once I entered New York City. I just got out of my car and walked towards the sidewalk and puked my guts out. It was so bad. I thought my stomach and intestines were going to come out of my mouth. The eerie, dull, and heavy feeling made me so nauseated, and my head hurt like a bitch. Seeing me empty my stomach on the sidewalk, a woman approached me. I could not see her face at first, as I was hunched over, trying to collect myself together. She presented me with a tissue from her tote bag. That's when I looked up, and it was a middle-aged nun smiling down at me. Now, don't get me wrong. I have seen all the nun movies, but this one was different. Instantly, being in her presence made me feel better. "You okay, child?" she asked me in a sweet voice. All I could do in response was nod. "You might want to drink this." She offered me a bottle of water, and I drank it like a construction worker. "Feeling better?" "Yes, sister," I finally said, wiping my mouth. "Child, do you want to have dinner?" After puking, I was hungry, dehydrated, and an overall mess. But if almost a year of van life has taught me anything, it was never to trust strangers and never to eat or drink anything they offer. But something compelled me to have dinner with this nun. I locked up my car, put some food out for my cat, and followed the nun. She took me to a pizza place, and I was shocked. Noticing my shock, she said, "Don't be shocked. We nuns and fathers enjoy some fast food too now and then. Come on, let's eat." We ordered our food, and she did not let me pay. Instead, asked me to find a table and sit. The moment our pizzas arrived, I started devouring the delicious treat, and the nun just sat across from me, looking at me with that all-knowing smile. As I finished almost half of my pizza, she asked me if anything had happened. In a long time, no one had asked me that question. It was as if the floodgates opened, and I began crying silently. She just looked at me. I finally told her what had happened. She just placed her hand around which a rosary was wrapped on my hand and prayed for a minute. I also told her how I wasn't close with my parents and how I had chosen van life. She smiled and told me that I had a wonderful life ahead of me, that I would meet a nice man and have 2 kids with him. It was very strange back then, but I listened to her. After our dinner, we parted ways, and before going, I asked her her name and which church she belonged to. She told me her name was Rosa and that she worked in the local church. Now, at the end of 2023, I have left van life behind. I am married to the most wonderful man in the world, and I have a kid and a second one on the way. After the birth of my first kid, I went back to New York looking for the nun to thank her. But when I reached the local church, I got to know there was no nun named Rosa. There never was. Looks like I met my guardian angel that night.
Hi guys, my name is Jasper, and I'm a writer. And being a writer means I am constantly in search of inspiration to write great stories about. This time, I am planning to write a book about all the famous urban legends from all over the world. While doing my research, I came across an urban legend of the witches. This legend can be found in many countries worldwide, be it Norway, India, America, Japan, or Mexico. But one story in particular caught my attention. This story takes place on a dark, scary night in a rural area in India. The story starts with a man named Ali who was traveling due to his job. Ali loved his job. But if there was one more thing he loved more, that was photography. Whenever he went on an overnight trip, he made sure to carry his camera with him. Ali was very good at photography, and many of his pictures were displayed in exhibitions. Some were even published in esteemed magazines and newspapers. On one such weekend, Ali, who lived and worked in Mumbai, had to travel to Kerala, a state in southwest India, for some work related to his job. Ali was delighted to visit the state he hadn't visited before. So as soon as he was asked by his boss to leave, Ali took the night flight to Kerala. As he was done with his work, he decided to explore the surrounding areas and perhaps see some famous tourist spots in the vicinity. He asked the local people about the places he could explore, and most of them told him about a beautiful large waterfall that was no more than 20 kilometers away from the city he was in. The next morning, Ali took a local bus and visited the waterfall. He planned to get back to the town by evening so he could catch his night flight back to Mumbai. He reached the waterfall and the place was crowded. So many tourists had gathered to see the iconic waterfall that Ali could barely get any decent pictures. Defeated, he decided to return to the small bus stop and wait for a bus back to the town. After waiting for about an hour or so, Ali wasn't able to catch even one bus. He was tired and bored out of his mind and wanted to pee. Without thinking much about it, he stood beneath a nearby tree, hung his bag to a long nail that was sticking out of the tree, and relieved himself. He took his bag, but while taking it off the nail, he removed the nail from the tree by mistake. Not paying much attention, he dropped the nail on the ground and returned to the bus stop. Not 5 minutes later, a car stopped right in front of Ali, and the driver said, "What are you doing here, sir?" "I am stranded on this road, I believe. There is no bus going to the town, and I need to reach the town before evening. I have been waiting here for an hour." "Get in the car. I am going to the town. I can drop you off." Ali was thrilled, and without any hesitation, he got in the car. It was around afternoon now. "Thank you so much, sir, for offering me a ride. I am Ali, by the way." "Oh, no problem. I'm Victor D'Souza, and you would have not gotten a bus today anyways." "Why, sir?" asked Ali. "There is a bus strike going on in town, so the local bus service is unavailable at the moment." "Oh, that explains why I could not get a bus. Also, Ali, what brings you here?" Ali was delighted to answer the question. "I work for an IT company, and work takes me all over the country. This time, I landed in Kerala and decided to do some sightseeing after work. I love photography. But this time, unfortunately, the waterfall was crowded and I couldn't get a good shot." "If you have time, can I show you an offbeat spot that has a waterfall too? You can click your pictures there." "Sure," said Ali. Victor and Ali spoke about general topics during their drive when suddenly, Victor asked Ali, "Do you mind telling me what you are doing near the tree beside the bus stop where I picked you up from?" They were 2 hours into the drive now, and the sun had begun to set already. "Oh," Ali laughed sheepishly and said, "Well, I was relieving myself." "You must not be aware, but any resident would not have dared go near the bus stop, let alone the tree." "Why?" "It's believed that a witch used to live on the tree many, many years ago." Ali laughed out loud. Come on, Victor. We live in the 21st century. Do not tell me about a stupid urban legend. You may think it's funny, but 6 people died in the village in the most horrible way. All of those people had gone near the tree. It's a pretty isolated area. It could have been an animal attack. 6 people dying after visiting the same place does not seem like a coincidence. Everyone believes that it was the witch's doing. After the incident, a very learned priest was called by the villagers to put an end to the witch. But he wasn't able to banish the evil spirit from this world. Instead, he managed to capture the witch in the tree and shut off her from the world with the help of a long nail. Yeah? Then I guess I freed the witch, Ali said, still amused. It was rapidly getting dark now. What do you mean, Ali? Victor asked, a little bit panicked. While I was peeing, I hung my bag on the nail and it fell when I took my bag off. I let it be on the ground and that's when you drove there. My God, Ali, I don't know what will happen now. It's better if we reach the town soon. Hey, watch out! Screamed Ali. Victor steered the car off the road and got out of it. Hey, are you nuts? Why did you stand in the middle of the street like this? I could have driven over you. Ali could hear Victor screaming at the woman who had stood in the middle of the road, but could not hear what the woman said to Victor. Soon, the two returned to the car, and the woman, who was dressed in white, sat in the back seat. She too wants to go to the town, but just like you, she can't due to the bus strike, said Victor. Ali turned to the woman, who was stunningly beautiful, and introduced himself. Hey, I'm Ali. I'm Mira, said the lady. Their conversation steered back to the topic of the witch and how Ali had possibly freed the witch. This is when Mira spoke. I do not think the witch can change her form. Before Ali could ask anything else, Victor informed him that the spot they spoke earlier about was just a few minutes away, and although it was dark outside now, he could at least see the spot. Ali agreed, and the three reached the said spot. Victor parked the car and told Mira to wait inside, as they both will return shortly. Victor led Ali towards the spot, which was in the woods. Hey, there is your waterfall. Victor pointed in the distance. Go ahead and smoke, and I will smoke a cigarette here. Okay, said Ali, and walked ahead with his camera, which could click pictures in the dark as well. That's when Victor got a message on his cell phone. And what the message read sucked the living soul out of Victor. He could see Ali in the distance, busy with his camera. And from behind, he heard anklets, meaning a woman was walking towards him. A few minutes later, a feminine hand landed on his shoulder, and he knew what to expect. It was Mira. She said, the police came looking for the driver of the car, so I decided to fetch you. They said they found a dead body a few kilometers away. That's when Victor showed the message to Mira, and she too looked equally terrified. Meanwhile, Ali turned with his camera hanging off his neck, and a creepy smile on his face spoke. Yes, she does change forms. A few hours later, the police found the mutilated bodies of Victor and Mira near the waterfall, and on Victor's phone was the message that had the picture of the dead body, who was none other than the real Ali.